First, I'm Andrea Abrams. Hi, everyone. I am the founder and CEO of Phygicode. A lot of you know me as somebody who's been saying from the advent of blockchain, I'm a tech investor who started in retail tech after 20 years in retail and fashion on the investment and operations side in a very global way, breaking barriers of geography. So we started breaking barriers with technology in 2015 through retail tech startups. And then we started focusing on blockchain and looking mostly at the utility of blockchain back in 2018 and how to create connectivity for items and how to create on-chain transactions and inventory management. But then that led us to a world of incredible new tools. I am a board advisor to a number of Web3 startups and blockchain companies. And my work at Phygicode really started as a consortium of industry leaders from the physical and digital world, mostly initially in the fashion and retail space, as we were all trying to figure out how to advance the conversation towards mass adoption and bringing the tools to real use cases. We've evolved to having three verticals today. We have Phygicode, the consortium, which is growing. You'll see very soon in our website in a couple of weeks, 20 new amazing luminaries who are real leaders in the Phygital space. And then we created Phygicode Connect and Phygicode Lab. Phygicode Connect will continue our work of connecting with impact projects, like much of the work that we're hearing about today and the amazing ladies of the Women of the Future, and Phygicode Lab, which is where we're really going to get into all of these Web3 tools and how to foster mass adoption in an enterprise way. And I am so excited to have this is, I think, my first panel with my dear and esteemed colleague, Dr. Giovanna Casimiro, who's not only my colleague, but my friend and an expert in augmented reality, and who joined to lead production for Phygicode Lab. And I just want to start by saying thank you to the Women of the Future. It's an organization I am very close to and I admire, and it has continued to provide a lot of visibility for female leaders. And excited that I have been in the first book, and now Gigi's going to be in volume 2. So I'm really congrats to her. And I would love for her to tell you a little bit about her before we dive into the tools.
Thank you, Andrea. So first of all, thank you all the organizers for the Women of the Future. I think this event is really incredible. This book is really a recollection of so many incredible females. And it is true. I think that's the first panel, Andrea, that you're together with my position, my role as head of production of Phygicode Lab. So I am Dr. Giovanna Graziosi Casimiro. I am a specialist in the XR solutions, and for at least 10 years, I have been working in this industry, and I dedicated most of my academic life and research in understanding immersive technologies, how they really do impact the existence of our bodies in this space we inhabit, but how we can also trigger the merged and blending of phygital and physical together. So a decade plus really trying to research and finding ways. In my journey, I worked also a lot with open source technology, which is something that always fascinated me, especially from the perspective of collaboration and co-creation. And also worked with Metaverse in the last 2 years, but I'm a big believer that you need to unlock and unleash the potential of the Metaverse into the physical world. Thank you, Andrea.
So I think we can start diving in. I always like to start, I do a lot of tech talks, Gigi does too, and for the last few years, it's very interesting. We're always in talks that are either about blockchain or conferences about Web3 or on-chain and off-chain. And I started this in January when we were at the World Economic Forum. I was asked to speak about on-chain and off-chain activities for retail and fashion. And I said, before we start talking about Web3, Web1, Web2, let's just take a second to figure out where we are today in the internet. I am a Gen Xer, and so I remember life and studying before internet, before email, before the World Wide Web was available for all of our lives. And I find it very difficult sometimes to imagine 1 minute of my life not being connected. So this is a very powerful image because as we get into the new tools and the growing tools like AI, for example, we just heard a great talk from Roxana about the depth of AI in our lives and where it's going. We need to look at all of the areas where we're connected. And so the present is very phygital for all of us. even for the parts of the world where infrastructure is still a problem and a barrier, we are seeing a lot of engagement. And one of the stats I'm going to focus on is email. In a single minute, 241 million emails are sent. So even Web 1 is very present. And a lot of what Gigi and I talk about, and we're going to focus on today, is this concept of transition. So we are not necessarily jumping from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3. We're here to talk about Web 3 today and the series of tools that comprise what's now been known as Web 3. But the reality is that it's a flow of transition. The other stat I really want to focus on for a second is the video numbers. Any of the technology tools that give us the opportunity to communicate through video. So, of course, there's a lot being said about TikTok, and 167 million videos per minute. That's a very compelling figure, because if we look at the psychology of how we communicate and how we expand technology, we learn faster and we capture more when we use audio and when we use video. So audio over flat images that have no sound, and definitely video. So a lot of what we're going to focus on is how the tools create a more immersive way of learning and communicating when we create this emotional connection. Gigi, what are your stats that you think are, I mean, they're all pretty amazing and staggering for me, but
They're amazing, but I'm a millennial, so I'm going to say that the emoji status is quite interesting because I do communicate a lot with emojis, and I was actually reflecting the other day how they are key for us to establish this new pattern of communication, how we actually translate the body language, our emotions. So it is going to be part of the way we communicate. We understand them. And I think emojis, they have part of this mission. The same way new identities and avatars, expressing emotions is really key. And we are using emojis more and more as part of our communication skills. And the second one is ChatGPT. I think as a creative, for me, using AI is really key to expand the capabilities of my brain. I think my creative process and this new creator economy. So I think that's a very important status that points towards new ways of creating with machine and man side by side.
I think if we go to the next slide,
Let's go.
we're going to focus, of course, today on Web3. I think during the 90s, the internet was mostly considered a read-only kind of tool, right? So we talk a lot about static pages. It was interesting to search for information, but it wasn't really until the advent of Web 2 and in the mid 2000s that the internet became really interactive. In the retail space, in the fashion space, the industry I was part of, Web 1 was transformative because we did everything in the physical space. So a lot of it relied on how you communicate, not only product availability and transactions, but also immersive experiences where only activations in physical space. Web 2 and the incredible tools of social media gave us an opportunity to create immersive activities that were very global, that broke the barriers of geography, that allowed people to also communicate. So consumers started to become part of community because they could actually create their own content and not just consume the content from a tech company. And you could create your own content using templates without necessarily knowing how to code. Now, Web3, or the semantic web, as some people refer to it, opened a whole new philosophy and cultural attitude, and it's one of decentralization. So we can use technology to communicate, but we have this element of trust. Instead of trusting in tech giants, we are now dealing with truth, with facts that are immutable, that are unchangeable, and also that are decentralized. And so the sort of democratizing access to information and bringing back a lot of the control, creative control, IP control to the user was the key. But the problem we're seeing with Web3, as we look at the new tools for our Phygital world, is that sometimes there's confusion between tools, software, and storage mechanisms, right? So I was telling Gigi the other day, sometimes people say to me, well, it's amazing how we've gone from desktops to apps to to blockchain. And I said, well, we're talking about apples and oranges, right? So we need to talk about what's the interface progression, what's the logic or the software or the types of utility templates that we provide to the masses, and then how the data is stored. And so I would like for Gigi to talk about this little graphic we have here, because this really helps us understand where the tools are headed.
Sure, Andrea. Thank you. Actually, I think it's really important for us to understand the difference between the interface, the logics, and the data, because we're talking in a way about hardware, software, and also storage. And it's quite interesting to also observe how it changes. When Andrea was speaking, for example, that eventually at some point the internet was accessible, right, to different locations around the world, and we see the globalization, the global village concept happening. We also see that as the internet and the tools progress, we see a mobility of the technology, right? First, we're in our homes and our computers. We could not go. Now we have the apps, we have mobile, we have mobility. And then when we arrive in the Web3, we see even more. We see that those tools, they're going to be attached to our bodies. Internet of Things are invisible sensors. Their technology is very nano, is micro, and give us the permission to really be everywhere and to be connected with the physical and digital world simultaneously. So for me, when you look into this pyramid, is about technologies that were evolving, but also adding components to each other, not in a replacement, but blending different moments of physical and digital. And then we're aiming for this spatial experience. That's why augmenting spaces is so key, augmenting data experience is so key, and bringing the internet to us is also super important in this process.
I think one of the things that we like to talk about in Phygicode is we focus less in Web 1, 2, or 3. There are different definitions. Obviously, Dr. Gavin Wood coined the term Web 3, but we're already hearing people talking about Web 4. And I always say we need to focus less on the package of software or hardware and more on the type of computing and the type of interface. So the spatial web era, and a lot of people are talking about it now since becoming more aware of how tech companies like Apple are making it a lot easier to get comfortable with the types of equipment that a lot of us have been using for many years. But the reality is that it's about making everyone comfortable with the idea of spatial computing. So virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed realities are something that are very soon going to become part of the overall experience, as Gigi's saying, and not something that we make a conscious effort to go explore. The Internet of Things aspect of it, which is the interface tier, is going to be very important as well, because we need to figure out how we are going to automate certain activities and find a balance in our society. And then, of course, there's the logic tier, which is where we actually become more efficient as humans with artificial intelligence, smart contracts, quantum computing, because we can achieve a level of efficiency and accuracy that sometimes cannot be achieved in the same time frame with our brains. But we actually need to figure out how the balance of all of these tools can really create an efficient progression and not a barrier. I think one of the reasons I loved having Gigi join us at Phygicode Lab is because we don't see a future of mass adoption for new technologies that are all about phygital experiences without really understanding how all of these mixed realities work together. And it's not about bifurcating the technology, but actually thinking of the use cases where they actually permeate our life. And Gigi, you have a lot of incredible examples that actually date back to a decade ago, before we were talking about augmented reality, for example.
Yes, in the last decade and more, I was part of several projects, and I also saw the advent of incredible cases that I think today they really exemplify what it means to do mixed reality. But I think the first point is that spatial computing and physical computing, they have been with us for a long time. And I always like to say that because it is a term that is going to be trending this year. But the community of XR solutions, they have been doing so much research since the 80s. And I think that's quite key to be said, because building spatialized virtual experiences is part of a lot of communities' lives, right? Including the XR community, the digital art community. And a lot of the projects I did in the past, they were associated to video mapping projections, which are also considered spatial augmented reality, right? To immersive interactive installations, to even like augmented reality monument projects. And I think reflecting upon all those layers, how mixed reality can add history layers, narrative, storytelling, and also bring a more open discussion about the things about us, right? Like monuments. So different projects I faced and I developed, they were really key for me to understand the power of those tools to change culture, to change economics, to really change the space around us. And that's why I also believe a lot in physical computing, because technology has to be seamless. It has to be there, but it can be really there. I don't need to know that it is there as long as I know how to interact in an intuitive way. And so I think we come into a little bit more of mixed reality, and also to try to understand the architectural layers. So Andrea, maybe you want to talk a little bit about mixed reality for everyone.
I think I do a lot of, I talk a lot with executives from the retail space, for example, and the hospitality space. And when you look at the merging of technology with physical activities, I always say it's not either or. It's about mixed reality. Technology should be here to solve problems and to enhance our physical life, to enhance our product and experiences. So the mixing of real world environments and computed generated environments should be seamless. Otherwise, it's one environment stealing time and intellectual property from the other. So physical and virtual objects and physical and digital experiences can coexist, but the tools have to become mixed and create a true interactive environment. So if the interactive environment, for example, means that a lot of people are sitting around a table wearing a virtual reality goggles, but not really taking advantage of the benefits of being there in the physicality of the space, that's not a great mixed reality experience. So when you think about shopping experience, tourism experiences, a lot of where we see the future of the tools evolving, particularly from 2023 to 2025, is going to be in how do we create tools and software and applications that actually enhance the physicality of the world we know. Because I think when we start doing that and using them for efficiencies, A, we gain adoption, and B, we feel like it's a richer experience. You don't feel like you could be in a physical experience, but the alternative, the not so great alternative sometimes is the digital. And so I think that's where this particular slide, we're not going to go into all of the details, but we wanted to show a little bit of, we're in Web3, the interaction and application, the data and storage, and the computation and networking tools are already there. It's a question of how do we get access to them and how we develop them.
100%. And I think when we look into the Web3, there are some very interesting points for us to observe. So when we look into interaction and applications and we see wearables, I like to mention that those wearables are not the wearables of Metaverse, right? They are the wearables. No, but I like to say that because we're so used to listen about wearables and we right away associate to digital fashion. Those wearables are the wearables that came before the conversation with the Metaverse. Are the wearables that are actually attached to our bodies, how we're going to trigger things through our bodies, the smart watches, but also other sensors and technologies. But of course, in that concept, we have the AR and VR goggles that more and more are expanding and hardware is evolving, right? And it's going to help our body to also expand its own capabilities and defeat some of our human limitations. So I think with the Vision Pro, everybody's excited to see what is coming next, because Google Glass was a case of try that didn't succeed at its time. Maybe it was too much ahead of time. And now we see Apple going back to that concept that may change the way we interact with our computers. And the second point I would like to highlight on the Web3 also, thinking about storage and data, the idea of open source that we used to see a long time ago already in the communities of underground developers and artists, we see growing more and more with the decentralization of the data, right? And also we're going back to a more humanized internet experience, that we trust each other. There are ways for us to trust peer-to-peer transactions, and also how that happens in 3D spatial environments, not only into the 2D internet that we know. It's a more humanized interface from the interaction point of view.
And I think, Gigi, also, of course, access to spatial tools is very important. It's not just about a specific metaverse. It's not just about a specific metaverse or a specific virtual world, but the overall suite of spatial tools.
100%. And then I think you get into the idea of the virtuality and evolution, right? When we research like the XR spectrum, I always like to say that we go from the maximum of physicality all the way to the extreme of virtuality, right? And in between, you have mixed realities, augmented reality, virtual reality, and so on. And when we look at the internet, we also see that evolution. There is an evolution on the way we relate it to data. So when we think, at least here, when we have this spectrum of how that virtuality interactions with the internet occurred, the beginning was pretty much reading our data, how we access the data, how we do research on data. Eventually, we started inputting on the internet. Through Wikipedia or social media interactions, we were able to input information, be interactive. And then after that, we started learning how to download, how can that internet interfere in the physical space, not only with filters on social media, but also how Internet of Things changed everything because it connected physical and digital, invisible, seamless, but it started connecting those two worlds. And then we go into a place of completely new identities, not just editing physical through digital, but we will have different layers of even ourselves, our own existence, our self-awareness. And I think that's the way we're moving more and more.
And now we get to adoption. So this is something that I love to talk about because I think we don't really reach full utility of technology until we can really prove mass adoption. And I think these are some very important principles to keep in mind that we've seen in adoption of prior technologies. It's important to embrace the transition. I like to say we're still in Web 2.5. We're not truly in decentralization, but a lot of the enabling that's happening during the transition is going to be very crucial, and we have to learn from the process. Web 2 is blending with Web 3, and decentralization will expand the goals of existing communities. But even if we don't reach full decentralization, some of what we're learning about community building, we'll touch on that, is partly enabled by the software, but partly cultural. And I think the cultural transitions are just as important as we embrace new technology and tools. Infrastructure is key. Infrastructure enablers are needed, and some companies that are infrastructure enablers will not be around. Those of us who were around during the dot-com area probably remember a lot of companies that came and went, but they were crucial to the mass adoption and the understanding of the technology that led to the tools that we use today. So a spatial web is going to be very specific and very special in this shift in experience because it is very experiential. It's not just a one-ended tool. You are going to have different aspects of technology contributing to an enhanced experience. And in the process, part of what we have to keep in mind is that not everybody's going to be able to reach adoption or even experience these tools at the same time. I gave a talk last year where we were debating about the power of infrastructure, and I said we couldn't do certain things with dial-up connections. It's not that the streaming industry didn't dream of a lot of the content processes that we have today in entertainment. It's just that we didn't have the infrastructure to make it available to the masses. Even today, 5G, which was one of the infrastructure components in the prior slide, is not available in many parts of the world. Free, high-quality internet is not available in big parts of the world. So a lot of the work that we do and a lot of what we see happening with the spatial web is revolves around a big push for infrastructure growth. And it's going to take for governments and for tech giants and for private enterprises to really push for that improvement in infrastructure in order to be able to play with the software, the hardware, and this type of capabilities we've been discussing.
And then, Andrea, I think we really enter in the discussion of path to maturity, right? Because when we also talk about adoption and we're really understanding the importance of infrastructure, I even listed here several solutions and XR technologies that they existed a long time ago, But now we are slowly understanding how we have hardware to make them reality and for them to be part of everybody's life. So accessibility, scalability will slowly come gradually as we evolve with the hardware and the infrastructure. And I really like to talk about augmentation, not only because that is the topic of my life, my research in academia and professional experience, but because it is key that we understand how we can expand the experiences, the spaces, and the layers of virtuality around us. Augmentation is not only that you're going to create augmented reality layers, but any sort of augmentation. In a way, technologies like AI are also an augmentation of our brain capabilities, right? But we do have different layers of augmentation from invisible technologies that are ubiquitous, right? That they are there and we can experience without seeing them, but also the layers that are intentional, like mixed reality, augmented reality, and all those extra layers will blend realities and they will trigger new experiences for sales, for retail. And I'm a big believer that it will change the way we understand architecture, space, and time, and even how we see each other, because our bodies will also change in this process.
And I think, obviously when we look at organizations and how they participate in the process of adoption, we're living through it right now, right? Everybody's very excited about the future of virtual reality with Apple, but the reality is it's the technology and the equipment and users have been around for a long time. But Apple brings it close to home for a lot of people because it's easy, because they learn how to transition from a flip phone to a smartphone using the Apple product. So this is when we talk about optimization, we have to look at how are we optimizing not just the function, the life, the experience of a small group of people, but of an entire group of people, of entire industries, healthcare, retail, hospitality, tourism, education. So what we're going to see in the coming years is a multitude of cases where a number of technologies can come together and aligned, enabled by the tech giants that currently provide those enterprise solutions that make it possible for an organization to see the value of investing in whole new technology. We've seen some of these waves in these industries when we went to a digital storage of data, when a lot of companies went to scanning all the documents they had up until the 90s, when they started communicating through email. Of course, we have to bring regulation and we have to bring rules of engagement for use of new technologies. Most companies, when they started using Web1, they had to create new rules of how to engage with those tools. And Web2, we're seeing a lot of legislation that protects human rights, that protects against discrimination, against the misuse of the technology. Because in the same way that the technology can enable an enhancement of good activities, an enhancement of our experiences and our goals, it can also enhance the work of bad actors. So I think optimization comes from infrastructure growth and from collaboration between private and public entities. And then we get to unification. Of course, today, for most millennials and Gen Zers, unification of certain technologies, they were born with it, right? There was no organizational difference between part of a company is on email and part is not, or some government data is electronic and some is not. I think for the most part, even at the government level in most countries, a lot of the data has adopted Web1 and even now Web2. What we're seeing is governments adopting Web3. In Korea, you can do a lot with the government offices on metaverse activities. That unification of the technologies and that sort of full transition of things that are part of the daily life is what really solidifies the maturity of a lot of the technologies that we see on that pink box, which, they're not necessarily individually adopted. They're going to become unified and adopted as a whole package of the new way of living.
And definitely when we think about the adoption, we have to really understand how hardware and software will be together and how they will be developed. And that is key, that all those technologies, they somehow are similar to us. I think when you look into the gap between generations, it is clear why some technologies are not easy to be used by certain age groups, right? Or by corporations or by different nationalities. So we have to really aim to create solutions for the spatial web. They are intuitive interactions. So it needs to be easy for me to interact with it. It needs to be fast because it needs to be seamless. I don't have to think what I'm doing or fear what I'm doing or fear to adopt, because fear of adoption is a reality among us. And also it needs to be persistent, because it's very common that we try to go to virtual worlds or even to go to applications that exist only while I'm online. They need to evolve on their own. Every time I go back, that world is still there, it still exists. That application is there all the time, multiplayer, right? Where we all contribute. So all those points are key for us to see how this digital spectrum is going to evolve and to aim for the right things. Because if people cannot access technology and not adopt it all, that is not in the right place. We need to make a better tool then. Let me just go to the next one, Andrea. And I think we could now, you want to go? You want to go?
Well, the spatial web, listen, we're going to, the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about where we are and where we're headed. And this is the fun part. So Gigi, go ahead. You start on where we are now.
I was just going to say that. So this is where we are now, right? We know we discussed so many things, what is coming, what we have to do to prepare ourselves, but we are in a moment where decentralization is happening in many levels, but the decentralized creativity is here. The new creators economy is being consolidated and is expanding. The second thing is the blockchain, right? Blockchain technology is enabling the expansion of many strategies, among them loyalty, right? CRM capabilities and much more. And we're seeing also that NFTs are becoming popular more and more. That's part of all of us, our lives every day, and maturing in its utility. Because it's key to remember that NFTs and any tokenization will be even more essential when utility is there, when we develop the utility for those. How about you, Andrea? Talk about it now.
Listen, off-chain to on-chain is a big part of my life. Offline plus online plus on-chain is already redefining relationships between brands, for example, and their communities. We don't talk about customers anymore. We talk about communities. And so when I talk to retail CEOs, I always say we have to change the cultural view of customer to community member. That engagement that started with Web2. And so that helps us transition into a strategy that's more about on-chain and off-chain combined. Metaverse experimentation is not going away. I personally think we're already there. We're seeing more experimentation. And I think it's really easy. You touched on something, Gigi, that was very important. The fear of adoption, the fear of not being able to be good at it has created some criticism of certain virtual worlds. But I personally think that most virtual worlds that are out there today have provided some valuable lessons of interaction that will lead to where we need to go next. So I feel like now the experimentation with adding more connection to truly phygital products is really crucial, and it's happening. And sometimes we're going to have some projects that are not seamless. We become very proficient at making and distributing products, so we're used to getting things immediately, and we get frustrated when we don't get the experience of the product right away. I think the pandemic helped us become a little more flexible in that journey. And I think what we're seeing with the metaverse experimentation and consuming product, for example, that is connected to a digital asset inside a metaverse space is something that is just the beginning, and we're already living it. So it's really reassuring to see that it's happening and so many brands are adopting it. And finally, digital twinning. Of course, digital twinning has so many capabilities beyond retail product. And we're seeing a lot of that in the automobile industry, in healthcare, and I think that's already happening. So I think if we go to the next slide, we wanted to end this with a little bit of like the phygital spectrum being cultural, right? And it's a lot of what Gigi and I believe in, what we talk about. And it's the fact that it's not just about the tools, and it's not just about software or storage capability or hardware. And we are today in a space where access is more important than possession. So that's going to change a lot of the way of how we interact with technology, because the technology and the spatial web in particular is creating a new hierarchy of access. The cultural currency is at the core, so it's more important than the physical or tangible currency, right? And so again, something that started in Web 2, but it's very, very important that we understand that the social interactions that we are going to experience in the area of the spatial web are very community-based. So communication, effective communication, has to be all about the values and the access that that you get to those values. And so that's crucial to understanding the future of branding products and experiences. And lastly, the community building is a big part of everything that we're talking about. So organizations should be spending a lot of time and human resources towards how to build a proper community that's aligned with the product and the experience that they offer. And now, we always say we don't have the crystal ball, but we always like to end our talks by saying, what's coming, right? And I think Gigi and I were on stage together in Athens last year with Vogue, and we said 2021 was the year of the NFT, 2022 of the Metaverse. There were a lot of predictions for 23. We're still living it. So I always like to ask everybody on stage. So Gigi, I'm going to start with you. What is your prediction for 24? Where are we headed?
I think I'm going to use the same word that actually I use in Greece, because I still believe on that, and I'm going to explain, which is tangibility. I do think that we're moving towards a more tangible experience with the digital world in a blended phygital experience. And I say that because last year was all about the Metaverse. I worked with the Metaverse for a long period, but I think this year is not so much about the Metaverse. It's actually looking back into technologies that are crucial to create extended reality. So I'm a big believer this is the year of going back with maturity to the XR solutions and how they actually solve real problems and not just create new layers of problems, but they come to really solve and expand our senses. So that's what I think, for me, it's priority this year.
For me, it's enterprise solutions. I think we are finally at a stage where the combination of infrastructure and belief in the value of the new technology at the government level, at the enterprise level, is going to push mass adoption. Because once we make the infrastructure available and the tools and the education about the new technology accessible, both in price and in education, so that the tools are not something to be feared, and we make everybody in their home understand. When everybody understood what an NFT was, I knew we were there. We were talking about tokenization. When we were talking at the dinner table during a national holiday about NFTs with children. So now I do believe that 2024 is the year where we're going to see a lot of consolidation and a lot of the tech giants working to really become the evangelists of the new technology. And I think that's when adoption of the spatial web will become really, really exciting. And if you want to talk to us more about any of this or anything in the phygital space, you can find us both on LinkedIn. You can message us at Phygicode.io. And we look forward to answering any questions, any comments. We love this community. So we are here to help, and hopefully we can inspire and empower other ladies to embrace and love technology.
True. Thank you so much, everyone. It was a pleasure to be here with you, Andrea, with everybody in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.